What is your least favorite or most hated fantasy sci-fi trope? Important characters coming back from the dead. It's to the point that if someone dies in most of the sci-fi fantasy movies or shows, it's almost guaranteed that the character will come back somehow with new powers or abilities. Sometimes it's cool, Gandalf, but it's just become overused. Just let your characters die and write new interesting ones. To be fair, Gandalf did die. He was just sent back to try again. But yes, people not really dying is annoying in lots of media. Death in a show can provide a lot for characters. Think Jiraiya in Naruto. He had to die and stay dead to help Naruto learn what true loss was like, which ended up helping him connect with Pain and Sasuke. To me, this is the bane of superhero comic books. They kill off characters everyone knows are coming back all the time. You can't have your cake and eat it too, though. I agree. If you want the drama of someone dying, they have to fucking die, which is dramatic because it is a permanent consequence. Take that away, and then what else can be undone? Basically anything. Therefore, nothing that happens in your story matters anymore. When you're a writer, you are like a mafia don. You must follow through on your threats or they lose their power. If you tell us a character is dead, then we better not see them again. If we do, then we're not going to care very much when even a character who might die isn't really in that much trouble. I wouldn't put a way to resurrect people in my stories, even if it was rather costly and unlikely. The slightest hint just makes me think, yep, that's going to happen somehow. Someone who dies is coming back. Now, if you're not worried about making a suspenseful story, then you can resurrect people if you want. I think a good way for aspiring writers to get around this is, for longer stories, start coming up with characters who are integral to the story and have all sorts of awesome things to do, who do not get introduced until later. You can keep your cast rounded out with your preferred amount of characters, and they can introduce new dynamics to replace the old ones. And they won't feel like cheap replacements because you crafted them from the beginning to have their own place in the story. Or, introduce them early as minor characters and let them take center stage later on. You can actually have a lot of fun teasing people with hints that there's more to this character that they might see later. But, if you have a long story with a central cast that essentially is the story, thus they can't stay dead, but a major part of the story is the suspense of being in mortal peril, you have fucked up. Yes, you watched a lot of stories like that as a kid. You loved them. They weren't that good. If you're flexible with your cast, even just a little, that goes a long way. Single biome planets, or planets that feel like a small city rather than, a planet. It's fine in older movies like the original Star Wars trilogy because everything else was so new, but it feels extremely lazy when I see it now. It also makes the universe seem much smaller, which does the exact opposite of what I'm sure the writers are trying to convey. Man is sent to befriend the natives in order to steal precious mineral from their sacred land. Man becomes one of them and helps fight off against his own people. Basically the Pocahontas Avatar trope. Don't forget that the guy will initially be laughed at for not having the same skills as the natives and being out of place in their world. And then like a week later at most, he's better than them at literally everything they do. People of the forest versus exploitative villains of industrial labor. After seeing Princess Mononoke, where both sides have a point, I was really hoping they'd change. Like making the humans from Avatar just regular Joes trying to earn for their impoverished families, or making the natives stubborn and unwilling to compromise. That's one of the things I've always loved about Princess Mononoke. Most people aren't awful, even when they're in a position that requires some degree of ruthlessness to even attain. People tend to have reasons that make some degree of sense. Very few are cruel just for the sake of it. I'm really tired of how most movies insist that there has to be a clearly defined good and evil. Most people are just trying to get through life. I wouldn't call it hate, but I find the way hive minds work in fiction to be frustrating. Kill the brain and the rest will just die immediately. Makes for a good end goal, but at the expense of an interesting enemy. I want to see a fictional hive mind that is actually a hive mind, as in each organism in the hive mind acts as a sort of neuron to the overall mind. Maybe they could be communicating through pheromones like insects in real life do. The more of the organism that is sharing the same air, the more intelligent and capable the hive becomes. Hell, if a group gets separated from the main hive for long enough, it could form a splinter intelligence in opposition to the main hive. There's so much potential with hive minds that it annoys me that it's always just drones communicating with the mainframe through magic, and destroying the mainframe is basically an instant win button. This was the Borg, until they introduced the Borg Queen. Kill one Borg and another just switches over and makes sure the task is completed. They wouldn't even attack the crew when the crew showed up on their ship because they were merely neurons in the collective. There was no one Borg on security duty. When there became a threat, the Borg were sent in like white blood cells and attacked the threat. It was really good until they introduced the Borg Queen. However, that is a good Star Trek movie. I like how Avengers 2 handled this. To defeat Ultron, they had to not only destroy his internet connection, but also every single body containing his code, including Vision, to ensure he couldn't repair and replicate. Look at this alien that looks incredibly like a sexy human woman. I like how they did this in Mass Effect, where a group of aliens are talking about what features they find most attractive on an Asari, incredibly sexy human-looking women, and suddenly realize that they're describing completely different creatures. So basically, the Asari look different depending on what race you are. It's always an epic battle for the fate of the entire galaxy or something. You almost never see a sci-fi that takes place on the future and has all this advanced technology, but the plot is just two slackers and their alien buddy driving around Mars City in their hovercar trying to get their hollow rug back. Almost all elves are Tolkien-like elves. Almost all dwarves are Tolkien-like dwarves. Almost all orcs are Tolkien-like orcs. Men are the special ones, like in Tolkien's world. The made-up languages are copies of Tolkien's languages. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with every book you write or world you make. People are allowed to take inspiration from others. Problem is that Tolkien set up this stereotype for so much of high fantasy, and people can't shake that when they world build. I really appreciate how they handled it in the Elder Scrolls. The elves are fair game, especially the high elves. The dwarves were technologically advanced elves who lived in underground arcologies. The term dwarf is exclusive to the humans and is derived from the giants' language. The elves use dwemer, deep elves. The orcs are effectively elves that were mutilated and outcast after their god, Trinimac, had the same thing done to him and became Malakath. Otherwise, the only differences are due to cultural isolation. Men are diverse and don't really have special origins, except the Red Guard. They are as they are due to following Lorcan rather than Akatosh like the elves. The latter only favoring the First Empire's uprising against the Heartland elves due to their association with the Daedra. I think the problem there is that the Tolkien versions have become so archetypal that if you shake your design of an elf to not be a Tolkien-esque elf, it becomes something other than an elf in the translation. So it becomes an issue that all elves are Tolkien-esque elves, because if they're not Tolkien-esque elves, they're not recognizable as elves at all. You want to know how much influence Tolkien has had on those races, even to this day. Tolkien affected how we view them so much that we spell them differently because of the man. Off the top of my head, only Discworld and Warhammer spell them differently. Discworld has elves and dwarfs. These are the words before Tolkien came around and changed the English lexicon. Warhammer has orcs. This is actually a change from Tolkien. I have so many. I beta read for a lot of amateur authors, plus run a blog that reviews books, and science fiction is my favorite genre, so that's mostly what I read. I've developed a special hatred for certain tropes, but some of my least favorite are Planet of Hats, where people are too lazy to come up with different cultures for their races or species, so they're all the same exact thing, and members of that species are barely individuals. If your alien character could be replaced with any other alien character and the story wouldn't change, that's an indication that you have some world building to do. I don't know what you'd call it, but some people do this thing where they have stock fantasy races, but refuse to call them stock fantasy races. They're short and have beards and drink mead and mine and build stuff and live in the mountains, but they're not dwarves. It just rubs me the wrong way. Hive minds. They can be done well, they usually are not. I especially hate it when every fighter dies once the mother/hive queen is killed. Fetishy world building. This is my world where all female humans are dead and everyone has to breed with sexy submissive Neko girls. Dude, no, stop. If you want to make that shit for yourself, go right ahead, but don't bill it as science fiction and try to make it appeal to unassuming readers. It's also weird when authors randomly insert sexy slave girl aliens or android women who need to learn the meaning of love in plots that have nothing to do with them. In general, sticking sex stuff where it doesn't belong makes me angry. Revolutions that get wrapped up in a neat little bow. Rebellions aren't simple, civil wars aren't easy. Creating a new government isn't fun. It's fine if you're writing a fun, adventure-filled fantasy to ignore the post-revolution constitution writing, but I've seen so many gritty sci-fi stories that act like everything is fine once the bad government dies. That isn't how it works. Unnecessary romances. I guess this isn't specifically sci-fi fantasy, but it still pops up a lot. Romance is fine. Well-written romance is great, but shoehorned in romance that quickly takes over all the page/screen time isn't cool. If you're writing a vampire, werewolf, human love triangle, go for it, but don't try to sell it as gritty, realistic urban fantasy if 90% of the page time is drama, angsting, sexual tension, tears, and making out. Writing about infectious diseases and not doing any research. This one annoys me specifically because I'm a virology student. Some mistakes are okay, but when you're writing about an actual disease in a completely inaccurate way, that's just spreading misinformation. I feel like Star Trek Voyager had an egregious amount of Deus Ex Machina solutions to peril. Oh no, this radioactive nebula we've been stuck in for days and can't figure out a way to escape is destroying the ship. Balana, we're 36 minutes in out of a 42 running time and about to die. Are you sure there isn't anything we can do? Well, I suppose we could remodulate the deflector array to emit a high-frequency tetraionic pulse that will completely negate the effects and leave everything back to how it was for next week's episode. Do it. Medieval stasis. World that was created one day and the next was a society living in medieval times, but really it's just a mixture of things that look cool from 400 to 1400 AD. And of course, never things like coffee, tobacco, or gunpowder. Since day one from creation, society has spent 10,000 years with the same furniture and no real advancement, or arguably a regression, because there are also these ancient structures that couldn't be created with modern technology. The worst is when lore is inserted, and all this world and history can be created, but never any new inventions to improve society. One of my favorite things about the Dragon Age games is that they make a point of avoiding medieval stasis. An important character in the first game is an inventor famous for creating a smokeless fuel. One race has acquired gunpowder and weaponized it to great effect. The second game shows that research is being done to improve mechanical crossbow designs with better results than the real world has achieved. The third game has a character mention advancements in siege engines and how that will affect an assault on a fortress predating those advancements. What are some of your hated sci-fi fantasy tropes? Let us know down in the comment, and like, share, and subscribe to the channel.